Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Terumot. We're up to Perek Hey Mishnah Vav. Today's Mishnah should be Le'en Mishmat, Neria ben Svetlana Aranbaev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Minuchatam Began Eden. Amen. Rabotai, today's Mishnah is going to discuss a case where Terumah fell into a mixture that did not have enough chulin to nullify it, and then part of that mixture fell into another mixture. Let us read the Mishnah. Se'at terumah shenafla lefachot mime'ah. If a se'ah of terumah fell into less than 100 se'ah of chulin, v'nidame'u, and as a result, the entire mixture became medumah, which we said was a mixture of terumah and chulin, which is prohibited to a non-kohen. V'nafal mina medumah lemakom acher, and then some of the medumah, that mixture of terumah and chulin, fell into another place and became mixed with produce of chulin. Rabbi Eliezer says, Medamat ki terumah vadai. It creates medumah just as definite terumah that falls into chulin does. Meaning, when calculating whether the terumah is nullified in the second mixture, the medumah produce that became mixed with the produce of chulin is treated as entirely terumah. Therefore, the medumah produce is not nullified unless there are 100 parts chulin for each part of medumah produce. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages disagree. They say, "En medumah medamea el lefi cheshbon." Medumah creates another medumah based only on the proportion of terumah it contains. Meaning, as long as the new mixture contains enough chulin to nullify the terumah portion of the medumah produce, it is allowed. And let us give an example. If one se'ah of terumah fell into 49 se'ah of chulin, the mixture is medumah and prohibited to a non-kohen, with 1/50th of it being terumah. If a se'ah of that mixture, which contains 1/50th of a se'ah of terumah, falls into 2 se'ah of chulin, the mixture is permitted because there is 100 times more chulin than terumah. Now, just as an introduction, Rabotai, before we continue the Mishnah, the Chachamim are going to present a similar halakha regarding dough leavened with medumah sourdough. Sourdough, we know, is fermented dough that was left to sit for a long time. So sourdough is added to dough in order to cause it to ferment and rise. If terumah sourdough was added to chulin dough, causing it to rise, the dough is asur to a non-kohen. Because of its great effect on the dough, terumah sourdough is not nullified even if only a very small amount was added. Therefore, such dough would be medumah, a mixture of terumah and chulin. So the Mishnah now is going to discuss sourdough that was made from such medumah dough, which in turn was used to make other dough. The Mishnah says, "Ve'en hamchumatz mechametz el lefi cheshbon." And dough that was leavened with sourdough of terumah causes other dough into which it was added to be considered as being leavened with terumah only in proportion to the terumah and the sourdough that leavened it. Meaning, the dough that was originally leavened with sourdough of terumah contained only a small amount of terumah. When some of that dough, which is medumah, became sourdough and is used to leaven other dough, we calculate whether the amount of terumah in this medumah sourdough can cause the dough to leaven. If it cannot, the dough that was leavened with this sourdough is allowed. And let us give an example. The Rav gives an example to make it more clear. We'll take as an example a case where the dough that was originally leavened with terumah sourdough contained 200 parts of chulin for each part of terumah sourdough. When a portion of it was used to leaven other dough, that portion also contained 200 parts of chulin for each part of terumah. If that amount of terumah would be enough to leaven the new dough on its own, then the new dough is forbidden to a non-kohen because it's considered to be leavened by terumah. But if there is not enough terumah to leaven the new dough on its own, even though it can leaven the new dough together with the chulin portion of the sourdough, the new dough is permitted to a non-kohen. The Mishnah now is going to conclude by discussing a halakha regarding a mikveh, where the same expression of lefi cheshbon is used. Now that we mentioned this concept of only in proportion, we're going to mention now regarding a mikveh. As a rule, we know for a mikvah to be valid, it has to contain 40 se'ah of naturally collected water that has never been in a container. 40 se'ah is approximately 150 gallons or 568 liters of naturally collected water that has never been in a container. However, there are several ways for a mikveh to be valid, even if some of the water in it is drawn water, meaning water that was in a container. And the Mishnah discusses one case like this. The Mishnah says, drawn water disqualifies a mikveh based only on the proportion of drawn water the mikveh contains, meaning once a mikveh contains a majority of natural water, 21 se'ah of water, the 40 se'ah can be completed with drawn water, but only if it's poured on the ground and allowed to flow into the mikveh. And Mefashim explain, if a mikveh contains 21 se'ah of water that has never been in a container, which is more than half the amount that you need for a valid mikveh, the rest of the water can be drawn water. However, the water cannot be poured directly into the mikveh. It has to be poured on the ground and allowed to flow a short distance into the mikveh on its own, which we call hamshacha. But if the mikveh contained only 20 se'ah of natural water and then another 20 se'ah of drawn water were poured on the ground and allowed to flow into the mikveh is invalid. And as the end Rabotai of Mishnah Vav. Mishnah Zayin continues, we learned that when one se'ah of terumah falls into 100 se'ah of chulin, a se'ah of produce is separated to be given to a kohen, and the rest of the mixture can be eaten by a non-kohen. So the Mishnah discusses a case now where this happened repeatedly. Se'ah terumah shenafla le'me'ah. If a se'ah of terumah fell into 100 se'ah of chulin, higbiah v'nafla acheret, and then after removing a se'ah from the mixture, like the halacha is, another se'ah of terumah fell in. Higbiah v'nafla acheret, and again, after removing a se'ah from the mixture, another se'ah of terumah fell in. Harezu meteret. The Mishnah says this produce is still permitted to a non-kohen, and the Mefashim explain, once a se'ah is removed, the entire mixture is treated as chulin. Therefore, the next se'ah of terumah that falls in is considered to have fallen into 100 se'ah of chulin. As long as a se'ah is removed each time, the next se'ah of terumah that falls in is nullified. The Mishnah continues, Ad shetirbet terumah al hachulin. This process can be repeated as long as a se'ah is removed each time a se'ah of terumah falls in, until it reaches the point that there is more terumah in the mixture than chulin, meaning until 51 se'ah of terumah fall in. So the Mefashim explain, when the 51st se'ah of terumah falls in, 50 se'ah have already been removed from the mixture, one each time a se'ah of terumah fell in. So at that point we're concerned maybe each se'ah that was lifted out was chulin. If that would be the case, we would have a mixture of 50 se'ah of chulin and 51 se'ah of terumah. Since the mixture may contain more terumah than chulin, the mixture is no longer allowed to non-kohanim. And the Mefarshim ask that why aren't you concerned as soon as the second se'ah falls in? Perhaps a se'ah that was removed was chulin, and now there is one part terumah per, and now there's more than one part of terumah in every 100 parts of chulin. So the Mefarshim explain, according to the Torah law, terumah is nullified in a majority of chulin. So even though the Chachamim, the sages, decreed that the terumah is not nullified unless there is 100 parts chulin for each part terumah, since it's only rabbinical, they allowed us to assume that it was the terumah that was removed each time. However, once there is a possibility that there's no longer a majority of chulin, the rabbis cannot rely on this assumption anymore. The question is, however, why when 50 se'ah of terumah fell in is the mixture still allowed? Even though 50 se'ah have been removed, there's only 50 se'ah left, which is not a majority. So the answer is, even though we're concerned that the 50 se'ah removed were made up of chulin, it is far-fetched to say that the 50 se'ah were entirely made up of chulin and didn't contain any terumah. Therefore, at most, we're concerned that the 50 se'ah removed consisted almost of entirely chulin. Therefore, even after 50 se'ah had been removed, the mixture still contains more than 50 se'ah of chulin and somewhat less than 50 se'ah of terumah. Therefore, biblically, like we said, the terumah is nullified. However, once 51 se'ah of terumah have fallen in, we have to be concerned that there may be more terumah than chulin left, and the entire mixture is treated as Terumot. That is in Rabotai, today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai leolam, amen v'amen.